Hi, folks, and welcome to the G-Think 2 channel. That name may change soon, just so you know. I actually created this channel many years ago just to focus on one artist. His name is Paul Pena. He made one album in the 70s. He recorded a second one, which unfortunately was not released for 27 years due to a dispute with Bearsville Records, his label at the time, and Albert Grossman. Same guy that discovered Bob Dylan, or at least managed him, and big music guy. But he really screwed Paul Pena right out of a career, unfortunately. But that's why I created this channel. I wanted to make sure people knew who Paul Pena was, and he's an amazing artist, first of all. This record is really nice. It doesn't have his most famous song, which is Jet Airliner by Mr. Steve Miller. Huge hit in 1977. Paul had his own version of that on his second album, Night Train. And I'm going to make another video later to focus on Night Train. But I have most of these songs up, and you may have seen some of the screen grabs in the videos. They come from this very piece of vinyl. I've had this particular one since the 80s, and I had another one back in the early 70s when I was but a young child. And the reason I stumbled on Paul Pena in the first place was my dad had entered the music business as a synthesizer player. And this was a novel thing in 1971 when this record came out. And he was also in Boston, hanging out at a studio called Intermedia Sound on a regular basis. My dad had one of the first ARP synthesizers to be privately owned. It was the ARP 2500 with the serial number 12, created in 1970 and bought directly from Alan Perlman right there in Newton on Needham Street. Years later, I worked at a pizza place on the same street, but that's neither here nor there. The synthesizer was so novel that my dad was able to work out a deal with Intermedia Sound to keep the synthesizer there, and he would usually be the one to operate it, I think, but really he just left it there for rental, and other bands used it at the time. Other bands using that studio at the time included Aerosmith with their first album. Of course, Paul did both his albums there. And later on, it became Synchro Sound, purchased by the Cars, the band The Cars. And I think they did just one album there, Shake It Up, from 1981. And today it's a little boutique for hair and nails and things. It was at 331 Newbury Street in Boston, right down the street from what later became Tower Records. So that's kind of the history. So I grew up with this album. My dad I should finish that story. My dad went to Venezuela on a package tour with these guys and also with another band called the New York Rock Ensemble, who, by the way, included Michael Kamen, who became a big soundtrack guy later on in his career, and he also worked with Pink Floyd. He's responsible for the strings behind Comfortably Numb, for example. He actually wrote that little riff, the dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. So anyway, again, that's neither here nor there. But my dad, who went as the Mad Hatter at the time, and Paul Pena, and the New York Rock Ensemble, and possibly another act or two. In fact, I know Roger Powell was there, who worked at ARP at the time and later became the keyboard player in UFO with Todd Rundgren. And so he was on that tour too. He was my dad's roommate. Paul remembered my dad. I actually got to meet Paul in 2001 when he came out of kind of seclusion, I guess, or at least he came to the East Coast for the first time in a long time, and he played at the House of Blues. And I got to see him, and I went to the gig. I noticed his roommate was there making recording just of the room. He had this big setup with two big mics and, dishes behind them and everything. And he was recording the show for Paul. Apparently he was recording all the shows. Unfortunately, I've never seen any sign of those recordings anywhere. I would love to hear those if they ever turn up. But back to the story, I was there at the show, and in between sets, I actually approached Paul as he was leaving the stage and said, "Paul, I had been a fan of yours since 1973, and I had burned a CD of this album, which at the time had not received CD release, and it was not available digitally anywhere. It was just a completely obscure album in 2001. So he was happy about this, and he said, "Wait, who was your dad?" Because I mentioned my dad went to Venezuela with you in the early 70s. And I said, "Oh, Peter Fink, the Mad Hatter." And he's like, "Oh, the guy that did Christmas carols on the synthesizer," which is exactly right. At the time, that was pretty novel. So, just hearing it, watching a guy work on a machine like this was pretty unusual in 71, 72, whenever this was. I think there were 2 trips, actually. So my dad got this album from Paul, and I fell in love with it personally, even at a very young age. It has so many great songs on it. Woke Up This Morning. I have a video for that. I'm going to put it up in the little suggestion box. I'm Going to Make It All Right. Nice upbeat track. The River. Very soulful track, and it sounds very gospel-y. He's got some real nice backing vocals behind him on that one. Lovely track. One for the Lonely is another one. That includes kind of features, actually. Jeff Baxter, later of Steely Dan and Doobie Brothers fame, playing slide on that one. Something to Make You Happy is a song later covered by Tedeschi Trucks Band, or maybe it was just Eric Trucks Band, I'm not sure. My Adorable One, the one cover on here. I'm actually not sure who wrote it without going into the album. I'm sure I'll find it later. I'll put it in the comments. When I'm Gone, just a lovely track. Kind of a road song, you can tell. It's kind of written from the road, and it's for somebody who's waiting on the other side. And then Lullaby, another just stunning track that I have up here too. I'll put that up as well. So it says in the liner notes up here, Paul Pena was born in Hyannis, Massachusetts. His parents are Creole from the Cape Verde Islands. His father, a professional musician. Paul was born blind, grew up with 2 brothers playing piano at an early age and learning Creole songs from his father. He studied the acoustic guitar, bass, violin, and at 16 traveled to Spain to learn flamenco. Paul, now in his early 20s, has appeared in concert with the Mothers of Invention and the Grateful Dead at the Electric Factory. He was featured along with James Taylor, Joni Mitchell, and Chris Christopherson in the 1969 Composers Workshop at the Newport Folk Festival. He has also played with Jerry Garcia, John Lee Hooker, Luther Johnson, Mississippi Fred McDowell, T-Bone Walker, and Muddy Waters. Pretty good portfolio. And then they've got some, well, you're never going to see those on this screen, I don't think, but those are samples of some of the lyrics that he has. And actually, I've used many of these, or I've used these whenever I can in the videos on this channel to kind of highlight whatever happens to be getting sung at that moment. So this has 8 tracks. I believe that I put up 6. And I left the other 2 because there was another YouTuber that had put them up. Maybe at some point I'll put them up just to be complete. If you ever run across this album, at this point it's pretty valuable. So there aren't many copies. It didn't sell well, unfortunately. It got great reviews, it just didn't happen to sell. So if you find one, go ahead and buy it. That's what I say. Because it's good. It's a good one. Now, if you can't afford it, of course, you can listen to the 6 tracks on here and find the other 2 out there. I also know that Amazon carries the MP3s. So you could go to Amazon and look up the Paul Pena CD. It's his first one, 1971. And you'll find the MP3s for sale there at a very reasonable price. Really beautiful stuff, and I think he actually did even better with his second album, but we'll get into that in another video in the future. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this channel and hope you continue to enjoy it. I also have, as many of you know, one of the very few live clips of Paul Pena in action, and it just so happens after I saw him at the House of Blues in 2001, he was featured on Conan O'Brien. I think it was 6 days later. I think it was June 8, 2001, excuse me. And looked exactly the same. He was wearing the same clothing he was wearing at the gig. It's a beautiful clip. It's worth your time. It's him playing his own big hit that didn't become a hit for him, Jet Airliner. All right, folks. If you have any suggestions for me or any questions, please feel free to leave them below. Feel free to subscribe to this channel. I'm going to see what I can do to put up a little more content. Unfortunately, Paul only made 2 albums, so it's difficult to go too much further with him, but I'm going to see what I can dig up and kind of keep this channel alive, specifically for him. Maybe I'll include some of his contemporaries at a future time, but for now, it's just Paul. All right. Hope to see you all back soon. Take care.